Welcome to Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on this podcast. He's been on this podcast before. He's been on this podcast, I believe it was in 2021, so it's been a few years. His name is Blake Huber, and he's with the Approval Voting Party. So welcome to the podcast, Blake.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
Blake, if we get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch. Now, I do plan to find the original interview and post that there. So we're going to aim to not repeat everything we did on there yet. If you can give people who may not have met you before a brief introduction to yourself, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So for years, even as a teenager, I was involved in politics. And I got involved in Libertarian Party politics, became state chair of the Libertarian Party of Kansas, served on the National Committee for a term. And then I just bounced around. We had an election, bounced around in politics, I guess. We had an election in 2000 where Gore and Nader were dividing Democratic votes against George Bush, who was the Republican. And it ended up in the Supreme Court. And I thought, this is ridiculous. This can't go on. I've got to find a solution. I've got to find somebody who knows what we can do to make this work better. Elections, that is. And so I met a guy named Frank Atwood, and he was talking about approval voting. And approval voting is very simplistic. It's extremely easy to do, and there's no additional cost. All you do is mark your ballot for all the candidates you like. So, for example, in 2000, if you want to vote for Gore and Nader, or Bush and Nader, if you want to do that, or Bush and Buchanan, you could do that. So you vote for as many candidates as you like. Whichever candidate gets the most vote is the candidate gets elected, just as it is now. But it takes away the onus of vote splitting, or some people call it vote theft. Why are you in this race? You're just going to take votes away from my guy. You're an idiot. You should be killed. And death threats did happen actually to Ross Perot.
Yeah.
So we just can't have a society like that where it's us versus them.
Sure. That sounds good. So thank you for the introduction there. Like I said, I plan to post the original episode so they can learn about approval voting and what the Approval Voting Party has done. Now, a lot has happened since we interviewed you the first time. There's 2021. We're far away from COVID for one. Now we have this president, Donald Trump, in the second term. We had Joe Biden, who served a term, and right now we are having Israel and Iran are at war, and we're involved to some extent. It's confusing because they'll say things like the United States ordered this, and then Trump will go on and say, no, we're not involved. And then, so given all that, please tell us how approval voting and everything else for reform and political change has been affected by all of this over the last few years.
Well, it hasn't affected it because we don't have it enabled yet.
Okay.
So we're working on that in several states. Missouri has Missouri Approves. There's a group in Oregon that have Star Voting, which is similar. It's a voting reform. Utah Approves exists in Salt Lake and other places in Utah. And Fargo, North Dakota uses approval voting for municipal elections, as does St. Louis. Now in Fargo, they recently took it away because some people associate approval voting with ranked choice voting. We'll talk more about that later. But they just did away with all alternative voting methods. And some are great and some are just good. But I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Okay. So that happened recently that Fargo did away with that.
Within the last year, North Dakota did away with any alternative voting methods.
Oh, yuck.
Our assessment is they wanted to get rid of ranked choice voting because they didn't like how ranked choice voting works. But I have no knowledge of that. But getting back to your original question, where you talk about all these different things happening in the world, if we had approval voting, one of the things that I learned as a child growing up, my mother taught me that everything's not black and white. Everything's not one way or the other. There's many shades of gray. This is far before the novel of the 50 Shades came out. And that's not what she was talking about, of course. But she says that there's many different ways to look at a problem. So look at Palestine, for example. Is it a one-state solution? Is it a two-state solution? Or is it a multi-state solution? Or what if, and my dream would be, it's a one-state solution where we have a parliament of all the different actors in Palestine, Israeli as well as Arab, coming together and finding common ground.
Huh.
And through approval voting, you actually could achieve common ground. I like to think as approval voting as being the closest you'll get to unanimity without actually being unanimous. Quakers, whenever they decide on things, they have to be unanimous. Everybody has to agree or they don't do it. Well, that's great for them, and usually they're a very homogenous society, and so they can come to an agreement fairly easily. But when you have a diverse society like we have in the world, then why don't you have a system that reflects that society? For example, the Secretary General of the United Nations, the approval voting is used in the selection of that Secretary General.
Oh, wow.
You can have as many people as you want on the ballot, and they narrow it down to a subset group. It's not a single seat election, but they narrow it down to a subset group through the use of approval voting. Why do they want to do that? Because they want to find common ground.
Huh.
We do it every day of our lives when we're out with a group of friends and we're trying to decide what restaurant to go to. Do we want pizza? Do we want salads? Do we want carnivores? Do we want meat? And we usually will decide on something that addresses everybody's needs, wants, and concerns. For example, if you go to pizza, you can get a salad too. You go to pizza, you can get meat lovers pizza, for example. So whenever you're looking, your listeners, you yourself, Andrew, and your listeners can decide where to meet, when to meet, where to eat, what movie to see, simply by listing all the options and ticking off the options that you like. Everybody else does the same. Which option is ticked off on the most ballots is the one you go do, because that's the one that brings you all together. That's the one that has the highest, the most, what's the word I like to use? The broadest popular support.
Okay.
What if we had elections that elected the person had the broadest popular support? We wouldn't have extremists. We wouldn't have these people coming in and say, well, vote for me because I represent everything you believe in, and screw them. Why do you have to add in the screw them thing? We're hearing on the news reports, well, Biden did this, and Biden let all these immigrants in, these illegal immigrants in. And I question, well, there's two things I question about it. Number one is why you have to attack Biden. If you disagree with him, you disagree with him. By the way, your side won, his side lost in the last election. So why are you yelling about Biden? Why can't you just get on with what you want to do? And the other part of that is, when did immigration become illegal? My grandfather emigrated this country from Austria. Of course, that's a white society, so he fit right in over here. He had to learn to speak English. He created a printing company, he wasn't wealthy, but he made himself a good living, raised a family. My mother was part of that family. She's a first-generation American. Wow. He came over by simply showing up at Ellis Island and saying, hey, I'm here. Where do I go next? They came over, they checked him out, gave him a medical, physical, and sent him on his way, and he thrived.
Wow.
So people now coming to this country don't happen to be white. They happen to be different colors. Oh, by the way, the Irish, The Catholics, oh my God, Catholics, we can't have them in this country. That's going to ruin our country. We're a Protestant, God-fearing country. So there's laws against Catholics immigrating to this country in the 1800s. They made Catholic immigration, Irish immigration, they made Catholic immigration illegal. Why? And now they're making brown people legal because they're coming from over the Mexican border. Why? Because they're different? Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox.
It's okay. That's the purpose of this podcast, is to provide a soapbox. So soapbox is okay. So do you think that some of our guests say that an Ellis Island system is an ideal form of immigration? So would you propose that for today, or do you think it's a thing of the past that worked in the past, but it wouldn't work for today?
I think that we don't need Ellis Island. I think that I'm an open borders guy. I'll say that right up front. I can go from Kansas to Nebraska. I happen to be in Omaha right now. I live in Denver, Colorado. The day before yesterday, I was in Des Moines. So I can traverse all these borders without having to show any papers. Okay?
Yes.
When I'm in Europe, and I was in Europe recently, I went from the Czech Republic to Paris to Italy. I did cross a couple of borders getting down to Greece. But most of the countries I went through, I didn't have to show any papers. That's the Schengen area, because they agree that they'll let each of these people that live in these countries go to another country, and they allow Americans, anyone with an American passport, to enter and to go within those countries too.
Wow.
In fact, it's interesting that you can get a tourist visa. It's automatic. You have a tourist visa when you go to the UK. There's things coming up in the next year or two that may interfere with that, and it has to do with finances and charging people. But in Germany, you can stay 90 days on a Schengen visa. You can stay another 90 days on a German visa. These are all automatic things. You don't have to go and apply or anything like that. In the UK, you can stay for 6 months.
Wow.
I think Ireland is a year. So every country has their own system. You can come to the U.S. on a tourist visa for 90 days. And there are people that have overstayed that. But why do we care? I don't get it. This horde coming in from the South is going to take our jobs away. Show me one white person that works in the field in California. There are farmers in California crying right now because they're going to lose their long-term immigrant labor because they're being deported, and they won't be able to pick raisins. They won't be able to pick their crops. Mostly it's fruit and vegetables in California, which have to be picked by hand. So why is it that we want to discriminate against them, but we'll carve out an exception? Just open the borders. We don't need Ellis Island. If somebody shows up from another country, they should have a health card, a vaccination card. My father's in the military, and whenever we changed stations, permanent change of station from one place to another, we had to carry our medical cards with us. So when we arrived in a new country or a new state or a new station within the U.S., we could show what shots we've had. We could show what illnesses we've gone through. Okay. So if we had chicken pox, we'd show we had chicken pox, therefore we're vaccinated for chicken pox. Same with measles. So those are important things. And the medical part of it is very important. And the other part of that is this country was founded on people having a second chance. So if you're convicted of something in another country and you come to this country, you're going to come here with the ability to make yourself over and to start over and start a new life. Now, if you screw things up and you commit a crime, fine, put them in jail, send them back to wherever they came from. But that's for criminals. You don't prejudge a criminal. What was a minority report? We're trying to forecast what people might do. All these rapists that supposedly came over the border, how many rapes did they commit? Oh, they committed rape? Oh, did we put them in jail? Did we even catch them? So we need to catch criminals. We need to deal with criminals, but we don't need to prejudge criminals.
There you go. There you go. I've seen research that says that the opposite of what this administration is saying about immigrants. Immigrants have far less crime as a whole. As a whole, there's always outliers, of course. As a whole, they have less crime than native populations. Significant. One study I thought said 33% less.
I believe that. I've not seen that study, but I do believe it because it's very simple. You're coming here to make a life for yourself,
Yeah.
and you want to make a life for yourself. So if you're from an Asian country that has a despot, and you come here to have a taste of freedom, and now we have a president who some people say is a despot. I don't necessarily agree with that, but he's showing some totalitarian thought processes, and it bothers me.
Okay.
But we don't need to talk about him.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's interesting, your perspective. So yeah, it sounds like you have a good view of immigration, a good approach to that. So you went to these European countries. So when you go on vacation, do you think in political terms, or do you rest your political mind?
Well, that's a great question. And you really can't separate the two necessarily. But let me explain why I say that. When I was in college, I studied economics. That was my major. I wanted to be in business and I really was interested in what drives people. So I figured economics was that thing. Friends of mine would tell me that I should really consider cultural anthropology. And Jane Goodall was famous studying apes. So I didn't want to study apes. I wanted to study people. I wanted to find out what makes people tick. But cultural anthropology is exactly what that is.
Okay.
So, and later in life, as I turned 65 and took audit classes for free at CU Denver, I did. I took a couple of cultural anthropology courses. If I had my life to do over, I may have gone down that path. Because when I'm anywhere, when I'm here in the U.S., right now I'm in Omaha. This last winter I was down in Texas and Florida and Arizona. Every time I go somewhere, it's not necessarily the politics I'm looking at. It's the culture.
Okay.
What do people feel are important? Culture is universal. Economics doesn't measure why you worship or where you worship, for example.
Okay.
There are parts of economics can describe why a person joins a particular church, but not why they have a belief system. Okay? Now, some people say, well, he believes this because he wants to be part of this church so he can have people come and buy stuff from him at his store. Okay, there are people like that. But that's not the real essence of it. So in a culture, we have a Canadian culture north of us that's very much different than our culture. In Europe, you have a culture in Holland. You have a culture in France. You have a culture in Spain. You have all these different cultures, and they're very similar, but there are major differences between each one. And if you stop and think about it, and you engage people and hear how they want to live their lives, you can see how that comes through.
Okay.
So as I travel, I'm looking at culture. Politics is only a part of that.
Okay. Okay, so you say these cultures are different. So how is the Czech Republic different from Spain?
It has to do with history. The Czech Republic, this is the third republic. They've had kings. They believed in a supreme ruler at one point in their life, and now they have democracy. Sometimes they'll elect somebody who is, and this is the same with Spain, but in different ways. Okay, so for example, in Spain, there's the Catalan movement. People in the area of Spain that's, I may be pronouncing this wrong, but the Catalonian area of Spain, they have their own history, they have their own beliefs, they have their own way of looking at things. And in politics, you can look at it as being bottom up or top down, or democratic, or a ruler telling you what to have to do. Like in the Soviet Union, that was a top-down economy. So all these things factor in. I'm not an expert, so I can't describe the exact differences between Czech and German. I'm sorry, not German, Spanish cultures, but there are many.
Okay.
The festivals that they enjoy. Here's a festival in the Czech Republic where they fight off. It's like the 1600s, and they fight off. They lose, but they're fighting off this enemy who comes into Prague, and they're fighting them off, and they reenact this every year. It's fascinating,
Huh.
and people get into it very much.
Interesting.
So, for example, looking at cultures, describe to me the difference in Texas culture compared to the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington. What's the culture difference there? You
That's a good
probably
question.
you can't put it into a very concise thing, but there's people that
Oh,
have
okay.
written books. The Nine Nations of North America, for example, was a book I read in my 20s and 30s, or maybe even later than that. I can't remember when it came out. But they describe the industrial Northeast. They describe the Southwest and the culture that was there coming up from Mexico, the Pacific Northwest and the culture that was there. So there's
Okay.
9 different nations, 9 different cultures in the U.S. Some people say 12, some people say other numbers. But you get
Okay.
the
Approximately
idea.
9, yeah.
It's what we believe in.
Huh. Interesting. So, dear audience, among other things, Blake is responsible for helping us name this podcast. A couple people influenced the process. I interviewed Destiny Clayton, and she was, like Blake, one of my first interview candidates. And they both mentioned about the importance of using the term alternative parties instead of the term third parties. So would you, and we're grateful to them because that's the name of our podcast, and I study language and I study communication, so I want to be as effective as possible. And they believe there's good reasons. It's not arbitrary to choose one or the other. So Blake, would you mind telling our audience why you believe it's better to use the term alternative parties instead of third parties?
Absolutely happy to. And I'm so glad so many people told you or suggest you make the change, that I wasn't the only one. That tells me that I'm on the right path. So when you talk about third party, you're diminishing yourself. So what the state, I'm trying to think of the word I want to use. The old line parties, the Republicans and Democrats, want to minimize the competition. So they say that we're just third parties. The Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the American Socialist Party, the American Solidarity Party, you name the party, Approval Voting Party, you name the party, and those are third parties. You can be safe to ignore all these third parties because they don't matter. And I call BS on that. Every one of us matter. There's a pirate party in Europe which
Yes.
says people elected to their parliament. Now, what do they stand for? They may not stand for much else than what maybe the Social Democrats stand for, or the Tories, or the Whigs, or whoever party's there. They may be a splinter group off of that, but they don't agree with everything the party says, so they want to form their own party. Let's say you work for Taco Bell. You've worked your way up in management, and you want to open Andrew's Tacos. You can do that. You can split off from the main group and form your own group. But in our system, because we only allow you to vote for one person, your listeners should look up Duverger's law. It's Duverger. It's spelled Duverger, but it's pronounced Duverger. The French mathematician, his theory was, if you have a single vote, you always have 2 dominant parties.
Huh.
Because there's no differentiation that you can make with a single vote. You can't express yourself at the box office as you can with other voting systems. So approval voting is the easiest and the simplest way of expressing yourself at the ballot box. When you vote, and I like everybody listening to this, but think about this. Why do you vote? What do you anticipate your vote will do for you? Are you simply expressing yourself while I'm a red or a blue? Is that who you really are? Or are you a pink or a yellow or a green friend of mine calls some greens watermelons because they're green on the outside and socialist or communist on the inside. So
Hmm.
they're red on the inside. So, and he uses those kinds of things to describe different factions within the party that he identifies with.
Hmm.
So why not have the ability for me as a voter to express myself fully and completely in the ballot box, where I can vote Libertarian, I can vote Green, I can vote American Solidarity Party, I can vote Forward Party, I can vote No Names Party if I want to, if I like the candidate. No Labels Party, I'm sorry. But you can express yourself fully and completely. Now, what's going to happen? Probably an R or a D will end up winning the election. I don't like using that term winning because candidates don't win the election. Well,
Hmm.
they do because they fight it out and they battle it out. I got my votes and you got your votes and I hate you, so I'm going to tell everybody to vote against you by voting for me and all this BS. But with approval voting, the way I like to look at it is that we, the voters, win because we've expressed ourselves fully and completely. We've told the powers that be that these policies, these ideas are ones we vote for. Doesn't matter what package they come in. Maybe the package is Mary, maybe the package is Joe. Doesn't matter what package it comes in. We're not voting for personalities. We're voting on policy.
Hmm.
We're not voting for individuals. We're voting on issues. So if you're pro-guns, you can vote for all the pro-gun candidates. If you're pro-life, you can vote for all the anti-abortion candidates. If you're pro-choice, you name the whatever issue it is, and you can decide how you want to express yourself at the ballot box. Now, maybe for some people, there's only one person that you would ever vote for. And in the last election, some people felt that way about our current president.
Hmm.
They would vote for Trump and only Trump. Some people liked Kamala. Some people like Bernie. And it's a tragedy because Bernie got shut out. I'm a Bernie fan to a certain extent. I don't agree with all of his policies, but I like the guy. I like the way he comes across. And if I were able to vote for him and somebody else, I may cast some support his way.
Hmm.
And think about support. But when you look at a candidate, you may be willing to give that candidate money, even if they have no chance of actually getting elected, prevailing and getting elected.
Good point.
You may want to show support for that candidate. How many candidates can you support with your pocketbook, with your money? Unlimited number of candidates. How many candidates can you support at the ballot box? One. Approval voting takes that onus away. You can support as many candidates as you want at the ballot box. There's only going to be one person that gets elected, so that narrows it down for the selection. But in the meantime, everybody else gets a level of support that's more true, I like to say. So if the Libertarians, for example, get 20%, 20% of the ballots are marked for Libertarians, I would call that 20% market share. If 50% of the ballots are marked for Republicans, they get a 50% market share. If 70% of the ballots are marked for Democrats, they get a 70% market share. That's a more true level of support than what we have now. They have to decide, oh my God, is this person even electable? When did electability ever become any kind of a criteria for choosing a candidate to vote for?
Hmm.
I know I'm blowing your mind, but I love it. I've run for
Yeah.
president. I've run against Donald Trump 3 times, one as vice president and twice as president.
Oh,
And
good.
I don't need to say it that way, but he ran 3 times. I did too. But he's not going to run again, so I may retire. Who knows?
So here's a question about that. So do you think there should be limits to how many candidates can run in a race?
Why do you want to limit my choice as a voter?
Some people
I
would
don't
say that
understand. Yeah.
it's going to be too many people on the ballot. It's going to be 100. Like in California, that one year they had 120 people on the ballot. So it's going to be too chaotic. They're going to say that.
Oh, I don't understand. So how many taco restaurants do you have in your town? Should we limit the number of taco restaurants? Should we limit the number of convenience stores? Should we limit the number of churches that you have in your town? There's just too many bars. We need to cut down the number of bars. Because if you go into one bar, that means you can't go into another. I don't understand the concept of limits. Why would I want to be limited as a voter to limit myself for voting for anybody that I wanted to? If I wanted to vote for a black lesbian who's just starting out because she's got good ideas, why should I be able to do that? And if I wanted to
Okay.
vote for Bernie Sanders, an old fart who has knowledge and wisdom, not necessarily that Bernie has knowledge and wisdom, but some people feel he does, why shouldn't I be allowed to vote for him as well? So having 120 people run, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay.
The ballot becomes
So,
unwieldy. It doesn't matter.
okay. Interesting. So, okay. So a person could write them in, but yet you also think they should be able to be 120 names that should be able to be on the ballot.
120 names is a lot of names to have on a ballot. I agree. That's an insane number of people running. If that many people are running, let me back up from that just a second. If that many people are interested, why don't the parties have them go through a process where they can learn how to be a better candidate? We have if there's 120 people want to run for an office, there's no, to me, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think this through. When you start a business, you have to have capital to get into that business.
Yep.
You may fail within the first 5 years,
Yep.
but you start your business, you try it. So I'm not interested in having some organization limit the number of people, but I think limits will occur.
Oh, okay. Organically, they'll occur.
Some people want to raise the level. You have to identify a level of support to be on the ballot. I don't think that's right.
Okay.
But I think what's going to happen is a number of people will run, and they decide not to run again. We're not going to have 120 people each time running.
Yeah, probably not.
And the parties are losing out on an opportunity from recruiting those candidates. I don't care what party it is, but there's candidates out there, people that want to run. The Forward Party is new. The No Labels Party is new. We have a number of new parties coming along that are trying to get ballot access in different states. By the way, Colorado has changed the law to where the way we got to be a ballot accessed party is not going to be that good for new people coming along.
Oh no.
And it becomes a money game. So you have to have 100,000 signatures or 50,000 signatures. Each signature costs $3 or $5 or whatever. So you have to have $1 million in order to get a candidate on the ballot. But that limits my ability to choose that candidate. Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Mr. Smith cannot get on the ballot these days because an honest person like Jimmy Stewart cannot get on the ballot these days because it's so limited. Where
Oh.
the others that ran were not part of the main group that ran. So we need to do away with Duvernay's law, and we circumvent that by having approval voting. People can express themselves multiple ways. They can support as many candidates as they want. The number of candidates that run will go down because they don't have the money to run a good campaign unless they attract enough support. And my hope is that political parties will decide, oh, well, these people ran, let's recruit them to run for us in this other office because we don't have anybody running that. I think 80% of the elected officers, 80% of the races actually have competition where more than one person runs. So 20% have no competition. There's either
Goodness.
one person running or nobody wants to run against them, which is the same thing. But those offices, let's say I'm a Democrat in Kansas, which is a very hardline Republican state. They could have those candidates run against Republicans in other districts where they're not going to prevail. The person who's there already is probably going to win again. But they're out there, they're expressing themselves, and those parties can recruit those people. But having 120 people for one office, I have no idea why that happened.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like that's not likely. It's a possible scenario. It happens on occasion. It doesn't sound like it's going to be likely. The Green Party made the point that people have the myth that there's too many people running for office when, in fact, it's often the opposite. There's not enough people running for office.
Absolutely. Totally agree. That's going to be my next point. Yes. We need more people involved in politics. We need more people involved in their local city election. By the way, approval voting, we don't know if it works statewide. We don't want to try it statewide. Ranked choice voting has come up. It's failed in a couple of places. It's gathered a lot of animosity by going statewide too soon. We want to use it in nonpartisan municipal elections. When there's a single seat election or a board of elections, you're elected multiple people from the same district. There's other ways to do it better than approval voting. But for single seat elections, like for mayor, if we can do it that way for using approval voting, like they've done in Fargo, then we'll see how it works. We'll get feedback from voters. And when voters want it, they'll take it statewide.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good approach. So your strategy is to do it at the local level first before doing it at the state level.
Correct. What we want to do is we want to get people used to it and think it through and think how well it works. The Pope was elected for 400 years using approval voting. They have a 75% rule that says whoever's elected has to have 75% of the votes of the ballots marked for that person. So approval voting didn't work under that. It started to fail because there was a group of cardinals that said, well, don't vote for this guy because we don't want him. And they corrupted approval voting, the pureness of approval voting in the church. What can I say? But they corrupted the internal voting because of the 75% rule, and they prevented some folks from getting 75%.
Okay, so
sad, but
yeah,
that happens.
Yeah. So was that fairly recent that a part of my ignorance that 75% rule came into play?
So it's always been there. They started using approval voting in 1400, in the 1400 era, and they quit using it around 1800.
Oh, so it's been a long while since they've used it. Oh, okay.
Yes, it's been a long while. Greece used to use approval voting. In fact, back in the day, Venice, I think it was, they had urns. Each candidate had its own urn. And the voters, it was an oligarchy, so there was only a few people who voted. It wasn't a democracy. But what the families would do is they'd meet separately, and they'd come in and put a white marble in each urn that they wanted to have considered to be the Doge of Venice. And it's a thing. That's what they called it. And from time to time, somebody would get a blackball. That's where the concept of blackballing came from. So a candidate could be blackballed by somebody, and then they would have no chance of getting elected.
Interesting. So it sounds like approval voting has a long history behind it.
One of our supporters said this was the first voting system. Cavemen sitting around the fire would vote on which of the three options, hunting areas to go to, hunting, gathering, whatever. What are they going to do when they go up for their hunting party? They'd sit around the campfire and they'd say option A, and people would raise their hand. Option B, people would raise their hand. That's not the wording they'd use, but option C, people would raise their hand. Around the campfire, they would make their decisions based on consensus. You can vote for as many options you want it for, but the one that was the selected option to use was the one that got the most hands raised. So they
Okay.
marked their ballots, whichever one was on the most ballots, that's what they ended up doing.
Okay. Sounds good.
It's really simple. It's so simple people are skeptical. I was at Freedom Fest 1 year, and this guy told us, you guys are nuts. He comes back the next year, and he looks at us and says, you guys are still nuts, but so am I. Because
Huh.
then he got it. We only saw him from 1 year to the next, but it took him some time to think about it. How would this work? What are the downfalls? I had somebody ask me at Politicon out in California, what are the unintended consequences of approval voting? I said, I don't know. That's why we want to do it for municipal elections. We want to find out, can it be corrupted? There's evil exists in the world. So can the evildoers in the world corrupt approval voting to make it worse than what we currently have?
Hmm.
The mathematicians, the American Statistical Association, the American Mathematical Association, I think I have those names right, but they use approval voting to elect their internal officers. These are the math guys. So if the math guys like it, how can I argue with them?
Good point. Good point. So that's a good question about unintended consequence. So it's good that you're doing it at the local level. The stakes are lower there. So if
Right.
there's inevitably going to be unintended consequences. I studied sociology, and that was one of the themes of sociology. Unintended consequences. No matter what you do, there's going to always be unintended consequences. So even with approval voting, there's going to be unintended consequences. So that way, with the way you're proposing it, you can do it at a local level, and then you can iron out whatever problems that come out, and then make it better. And as it goes up, keep getting better and better. Rather than if you wanted to do it at a high level, and then it had a major problem, then the effects would be greater, and then it would be harder to backtrack on that.
You got it exactly. We want data. Once we have the data, we can decide whether this is scalable to a higher level or not. And if it isn't, then we can just fold our tent and go home and continue with what we have. Our system, what we have, has some flaws in it. It has some unintended consequences. We have candidates hiring, let's say, doesn't matter what party they belong to, but they choose the opposite party. Just to give an example, this isn't trying to trash either party. But let's say Republicans want to win this particular race. So the Republican candidate will hire a Democrat-like candidate and fund their campaign to take votes away from the Democrat so that he will win. For example, if it's a 50-50 race between the Republican and the Democrat, the Republican gets 50 out of 100 votes. All he has to do is have the Democrats put votes with somebody else who talks, acts, and thinks like they do. And then each of those candidates get 25% of the vote. He gets 50% of the vote, and he wins. It doesn't matter whether it's a Republican doing it or a Democrat doing it, or anybody. It could be a communist. I don't care what party it is. The problem is our current voting system not only encourages that, it incentivizes it. It incentivizes negative campaigning. So if I'm campaigning against you, Andrew, and we're running against each other and we have diametrically opposed views, then all I have to do is say, well, Andrew is a wife beater. He's not married, but his last 3 wives, he beat them in fact, one almost died. You don't want to vote for Andrew because he's a wife beater. I'm incentivized to say that because I've got a lot riding on this. I could end up getting elected, and you could end up being somebody who just was an also-ran. That's what our current system encourages and incentivizes. It's your one precious vote. The voter's one precious vote is what I'm fighting for. Now, when we have approval voting, there's no incentive for me to attack any opponent. Because all that's going to happen is to come back on me. So if for example, a Republican, well, let's change that around. Let's say a Democrat wants to be unscrupulous, and they want to hire a Republican or a conservative type person to run against their conservative opponent. It's not going to help them because the Republican will get, if the Republican used to get 50% of the vote, 50% of the ballots, and the new Republican may also get 50% of the ballots, and the Democrat will still get 50% of the ballots. And I know that doesn't sound right, but it's a matter of ballots marked for them. So each election, each candidate is a unique event. I can't remember the mathematical term they use for this, but if you can mark your ballot for as many candidates as you want, the number of possibilities are the number of candidates in the ballot times the number of ballots. So we're used to saying one person, one vote, which is what the Supreme Court said had nothing to do with what I'm talking about with approval voting, but I'll get back to that in a second. When you can mark your ballot, you have 10 people running, you have 10 choices. You can mark them all, you can mark one, you can mark two, you can mark none if you like. So you have 100 ballots, 10 candidates in each ballot. That's 1,000 potential votes. So another way to count the votes in approval voting is to say, how many votes did they get against the possible total number of votes? So 1 vote out of 1,000, 10 votes out of 1,000, 1,000 votes out of 1,000. That's marked on every ballot. Or you can just simply say, how many ballots were marked for this individual? 50% of ballots for him, 50% for her, 39% for him. Well, it's going to be between the top two, the two that got 50%, and you can handle that however you want. You can do a runoff. Generally speaking, with the types of we've done studies where we've had people do straw polls. We've done straw polls where we have all the candidates listed and people can select as many as they want. We generally don't have a tie. At 200 votes, somebody might get 191 votes. Somebody else gets 190 votes out of 200 ballots.
Oh, okay.
That's very rare. It's as rare as it is now. It can happen, just like it does now, but it's just not important.
Okay, it's going to be on occasion a rare event.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you handle the way you do now. Some places, some jurisdictions say just flip a coin. Whoever gets the coin toss, they get elected. The other person is there for next time. One last thing about approval voting that I didn't mention, and this is especially important amongst clubs. You're trying to elect the club president or treasurer or whatever, and you use approval voting. So you have 3, 4, 5 people running for club president. Of those 5 people, one's an also-ran. He's just putting his name out there because he wants to be social, whatever. It's not a really, it's not a race where he feels like he has a chance of, he's not pushing himself forward for that much to win the race. And you have 3 or 4 other people that really want to contend. You end up with 2, maybe 3 people that are over 50% of the ballots for them. You have a clear person that got the most votes, got elected, but the second and third person, if that person has to move out of state and you need to elect a new president, you don't have to have a new election. The runner-up gets the office automatically. Now, that's depends on what the club wants to do. But think about that. Exactly.
Yeah.
So if
That's
you
good.
and I and a couple of our friends have this club, and you and I are running against each other, and for some reason they give me one more vote than you, and then I pass, what's going to happen? Do you have to have a whole new election? No. Andrew, you get because you have one less vote than me. That means you had the broadest popular support amongst the remaining candidates.
Huh. That's good. Yeah, that's the
makes
issue
it
with
so
nonprofits. That's the issue with nonprofits.
Yes.
But you have people that aren't going to be in the officers. They're going to have to replacements of officers. So yeah, that's a good way to put things. So that's a good way to do things, not only for government but also for clubs, organizations. So
Absolutely.
that's wise.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So in that sense, you're already building in a succession plan.
Oh,
The
well
other
put.
part of that is, right, the other part of that is that if you're trying to select a single candidate to fill a board seat, How do you do that? You narrow it down and narrow it down and narrow it down? No. All the people on the board look at all the candidates available and mark the ones they like. And the person that's marked on the most ballots gets the board seat because they want somebody that can work with them.
Oh, sure.
It's so simple. It's so effective. Now, we don't know about unintended consequences. I will admit that. Some people say approval voting just leads to the muddy middle. Well, I don't know what that means.
Huh.
But if people if they're voting for the people they like best, the person that has the broadest popular support is the person that should get elected. When we think of popular presidents in the past, you think of Dwight Eisenhower. Did he have the broadest popular support of any candidate running that year? Absolutely. Ronald Reagan, same way. We get to Ross Perot and Clinton and Bush, H.W., and we had Ross Perot getting death threats because he's taking votes away from, Perot is taking votes away from Bush. And he may have gotten into that race because he hated Bush and didn't want Bush to get elected, which happened. So again, we're incentivizing and encouraging people to do that. But Perot could have gotten elected, perhaps, if he didn't have Bush running against him. A lot of people voted for Perot, feel like they wasted their vote. With approval voting, there's no wasted votes. Every vote is counted.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I've taken over your podcast. I apologize.
No, that's what we're here for. We're here to give you a soapbox to share your views. That's the purpose of the podcast. So no worries about that. That's what we're here for. So I remember last time we asked our guests how we can support, if they're a political party, how we can support the party. I remember last time you saying that rather than support the approval voting party, you want people to experiment with approval voting in their lives. So would you still say that a few years later, that's how the best way we can support you is to experiment with approval voting?
Well, a lot of what's been happening with the approval voting party, it's a one-state party. One year we were on 2 states because of COVID. We were able to get all the ballot in Vermont as well because they didn't want us to go door to door spreading COVID and getting signatures. But this costs money. And Frank Atwood and I have been pretty well financing things all along. But what I've been telling people now is experiment with yourself. Go to your city council. Tell them you'd like to see approval voting. Have them do a focus group on approval voting. That'll cost some money. And the other thing to do is send us $1. $1. Go to approvalvotingparty.com. Click on the donate button and give us $1. Just $1. That'll show the support. Will it raise a lot of money? Well, yeah, if 1 million people show us support, that's $1 million we can use to spread the word.
Yeah.
But that's not the important thing. The important thing is, are you willing to stand up and say, yes, I raise my hand, I support approval voting? So $1, everybody can afford $1. I think of that dollar because we have to pay fees, we only get 50 cents. But again, the money is less important than the person standing up and saying, I'm not saying if you can give us $10. We have people giving us $10 a month. Okay. We've had people giving us $100 from time to time or $50 from time to time. Do what you can, but give us $1. That's all I'm asking for.
Okay.
With $1, you show support. We can report. When I ran for office, it says you can't vote for me. There's no way you can vote for me. You want Colorado, you could vote for me, but in Florida, you couldn't. But what you can do is give me $1. Show your support. Your dollar is your vote. And when we get enough dollars to enough unique donations, not just dollars, if we get $1 million from 50,000 people, so that's 50,000 votes for approval voting.
Wow.
And then we move forward. We can use that when we go to different city councils, say this many people in your jurisdiction want to use approval voting. Let's do this. So it's the power of the grassroots.
All right. So where can they do that at? What's the address so they can donate?
Sure. ApprovalVotingParty.com,
That's easy to
and
remember.
then ApprovalVotingParty.com/donate. They can
Okay,
donate
yeah, that's easy
online.
to remember. Great.
Yeah.
All right, I can.
Well, we've
I
covered a
plan to
lot
put
of
that.
territory today, Andrew. This has been a
Yeah,
great interview. I really appreciate it.
yeah, we're glad you came on the show, and it's nice to have repeat guests to talk about what they've been doing over the time and what their views have been and how they analyze the current situation. So yeah, we appreciate you coming on, Blake.
Oh, my pleasure. You're welcome.
All right, we
I
wish you.
always enjoy talking. As you can tell, I love to talk. Okay. So I love to talk about politics. I love to talk about cultures and how people get along with one another. So thanks again.
Yep, thank you, and wish you all the best in everything you do in your personal and professional life.
Thank you.
Bye now.